Reasons why your car starts then dies in seconds with fixes. Are you ready to fix this car of yours or a customer's that the car starts then dies in seconds? If yes is the answer, then roll up your sleeves, let's get started. Before we go, you're gonna need a cup of coffee. You're gonna get a pen and paper, because in this very series here, I'll be leaving no stone untouched until we get to the root part of this very problem and get it solved. So, I'm going to be using this camera to show you details whenever there is. So, stay put and let's get started. When you start your car, all right, you assume that this car is going to take you to few places. But what happened if your car died right immediately after the cranks? Examining the cause of the sudden engine stalling can be very difficult. There could be many possible reasons why it did. In this video, I will help you to understand why your car starts then dies in seconds and possibly even fix it by yourself. If your car starts and dies in seconds, the only way to fix it is to first find out the cause. While you can do it on your own, it's best to let a mechanic handle it if you're unfamiliar with the ins and outs of dealing with your car. The most common concern you should look into, one, is a bad idle air control valve. This is for McTray for obvious reasons. And this is Jetta that I'm dealing with, so let me go ahead and pop the hood open and show you what the idle air control valve for this very Jetta model looks like. Then I'll give you a precise information about it and what you should know. Okay, this is 1.6 liter Jetta 2007 model. And where is a idle air control valve? The idle air control valve for this very car here is not different. Both the throttle position sensor, the idle air control valve, everything is stacked inside here. So, have a wiring harness down here. So now you can know when this part have a problem, since it's embedded with this very throttle body here, it's gonna be to replace the throttle body as a whole in order to get the problem solved. But first, before doing that, you want to make sure you flush it, clean it, and make sure that it's clean with a carburetor cleaner before you can proceed further. Test it, allow it to dry first. Then put it in a car, leave it for a while, for a second to dry, then start the car. Rev the engine, take it to 1,500 RPMs, right? Then after that, if the problem persisted, then you're going to be needing to get another throttle body or idle air control valve, which I showed you. For some cars, I'm going to be showing some other ones on the screen, because for different car makes and model have different idle air control valve. I just showed you the one for Make 3 here, and this is what it looks like. So it's one of the common parts that actually contributes to your car starting and dying immediately in seconds. Your car idle air control valve, AAC, regulates the air mixtures. If you don't understand what it means, regulates the air mixtures between the air intake system controlling the air that flows into your engine, and responses to the gas input pedal. This gas, when you step on it, it responses. So this is actually what helps you to actuate that very functions. You also manage the changes when your engine is moving, when the AC is on. When you put on this AC on, let's say you turn the car on, all right, and you see how the RPM is. Now, if I go on to put the AC on, the RPM just changes and the sound of the engine changes. So it manages, the computer uses this very guy here to manage the engine load when you on the AC or accessories, some sort of power taking accessories or utilities in your car, including your headlamp or whatsoever that demands a lot of power. So if this idle air control valve fails, your computer is going to find it hard to actually control it. So what can you do? You can clean it up with a cap cleaner and try to fit it back. And if it doesn't, then replacing it is going to be the next thing you're going to do. And if you replace it, it doesn't end there. You're going to need a computer, a very good computer, to actually calibrate it. I don't have the tutorial here, but try to check for other tutorials on how to be able to calibrate this idle air control valve on the internet. You're going to find it very helpful. So that is number one. Now, when you have it calibrated, then the problem should be solved. If it is not solved, now we go on to the phase 2. The phase 2 here is a severe vacuum leak. When we talk about vacuum leak, for most cars that are equipped with it's MAF sensor, not map sensor. This is map sensor, manifold absolute pressure sensor. And map sensor most often times can be before the entrance of this very throttle body here. And what it does is almost the same thing with this guy here. They are actually to meter the amount of air that goes from this very filter housing here, the filter here, and flow into the engine. So as it goes in there, there is a lot of chunk of air that flows inside there. And it's also make sure that, you know, if the map sensor is here, any leakage from here is permissible, but it should be guided not to allow dirt to get inside there. But anyone after the map sensor is not allowed, because anyone due to crack of that very vacuum there is going to create a problem, because it's creating unmetered air, and if it is huge, the computer wouldn't be able to account for that crack, that some sort of air that's going inside there, and therefore it's gonna not be able to meter it and not be able to actually measure correctly the amount of air that's going inside through that very metering device, that air metering device, mass airflow sensor, then is actually gonna shut the car down. So that's a vacuum leak. Is another severe vacuum leak is one other thing which you want to check. So if you find a cracked vacuum hose, then you want to go ahead and get it replaced, because if you don't replace it, well, the worst thing there which is actually going to happen is the problem is not going to go away. And if the problem is not going to go away, you're going to remain where you are. So that's how to fix it. You're going to check for that vacuum leak here. There is a lot of rubber hose, including here, right? I'm going to check this. That goes to the charcoal canister. For most cars that are equipped with a two-way system pressure regulator that have some sort of a pipe to it and a vacuum line to it, you also want to check it, all right? So let's move to the third one. Okay, the number 3 is anti-theft system. Yeah, anti-theft. Anti-theft system is a security measures which the engineers have actually put in place to actually save your car from getting stolen. So if an unauthorized access person actually get in with the wrong key, like this key you can see right now, try to open the car is not going to start. Now when you put it, let's look at it, you're going to see this light here. This one that's flicking right there, that is you can see the key sign there. So it should turn off as soon as you put it, but if it doesn't turn off and stay constantly on, then you have found a problem. I've actually solved this problem with Nissan before on my channel, so it's also very possible with most Toyotas and most other car make and model Hondas. I've blogged about it on my channel. So anti-theft is one of those things. So the first thing you want to check is there is an infrared chip that is somewhere here. If it is broken or is not present there, the ECU will not be able to recognize this key as the main key for this very car, and if so, when that happens, then it starts flashing that immobilizer light right up here, which is also the anti-theft system. Or let's say that you have the same kind of key, but the other one doesn't contain the chip, or it's not programmed, coded into this car. If you put this key into the car and trying to start it, it's not going to start it. So even if it starts, it's going to start and shut down in seconds. So how to do it is to get this key checked by a technician, or if you have the power, I'm talking about tools and the knowledge to be able to do it, then use your scanner to check if it's this key that's actually the problem, or the ring here that's supposed to be receiving the transmitter from this very infrared chip that is here into it, and any of them could be the problem. But using a computer scanner can be the best way to actually know. And most often time for some other cars, the battery powers it. There is a battery on this very key fob here, this remote and key entrance, and if that battery is dead, I've seen it on Toyota before, then it's not going to recognize the key, so you want to go ahead and change it. So that's how to fix it right there. Number 4 is 30 or 40 map sensor or map sensor. I'm putting this together because these two guys literally do the same thing. Most cars that are equipped with map sensors are not equipped with map sensor, except if the car is not natural aspirated. Like my Passat over there is not natural aspirated, so you have both map sensor and you have map sensor. And in this case here, this car, this 1.6 FSI Jetta 1.6 model is not equipped with map sensor but map sensor. So one of the symptoms of a very bad map sensor is that when you start the car, it shuts down. When a car starts and shuts down immediately, you want to check and make sure that the wiring harness is connected. If I remove this one right now, I start this car, it's going to start and shut down. I don't want to mess up with the system because my computer right now cannot be able to read this car, so to start clearing error code. Now, for some other reasons also, when you're trying to figure it out, most often times also, before we go there, most often times when you're having any code related to map sensor, suppose you plug in your scanner underneath the steering column, which is right here. Any P map sensor or map sensor related code then it doesn't necessarily mean that this map sensor or map sensor is completely bad. Most oftentimes it could be dirty because as the air flows from this very bus here into the engine, there is a lot of dirt inside, especially if you're not the one who has been keeping up with a routine of changing your fuel filter, so your air fuel filter, so it's going to create a lot of problems when it clogged up. So you want to first of all try to use a map sensor cleaner to clean it, which you can find on online stores. When you clean that and you install it back, allow it to dry, then start the car, allow it to warm up for some times, rev it up, take it to 1.5 RPMs, then leave it for let's say 30 seconds, then leave it. If it doesn't stabilize, if it stabilizes, then find the problem is solved. If it doesn't stabilize and shuts down and still throw the code, then this thing here is gone. So what can you do? You can replace it, and also you want to inspect and see if it's broken. Like you can see this one right now is broken, all right? You can see it right here, but it still works. Some of them can be broken, and one of the pins, you can see this one has up to 4 pins, could be damaged. So you want to inspect that, you want to check the connectors and make sure that it's in a good condition if you're getting any of those code, because any of this can actually be the problem. And when you get it resolved, it will stun you not to get that part replaced in the first place. Because if you have replaced it, then you have wasted your money. Next is bad ignition switch. The ignition switch is right here. There is a switch in this very position right here, where this guy here, this slot in the female part here, and this male part here. The male goes in the female part here. So this female part here is where the switch is. So most often times when this switch get defective, I've seen that on most Hondas, you have the tendency of switching your car off even when you switch it on. Let's say you start this car right now. It has a tendency of switching the car off while the key is still in an on position. And the best way to actually find this can be very, very hard to actually diagnose, because most often times this ignition switch can be that terrible. And while we're talking about ignition switch, we're also going to dive into some other part of the ignition system, which is ignition coil. Because if the ignition switch is good and the ignition coils are bad, then you're not out of the woodwork. Now, for most car making model differs. For this very Jetta here, it has ignition coil pack, which you can see right now, which is 4. Most of them, when they get defective, it could be just 1 or 2 that is not functioning, but some of them can be very terrible that it's not even producing. I mean, I've not seen any coil packs like this that all of them get defective at once. But if it is for those ones that are single, like you can find in my Passat, they can all actually pretty much go out at the same time. And when they do, you try to start a car, it's just going to produce just little sparks. That's not enough to the spark plug. That's not enough to keep the engine running, but it's enough to start the engine. Get that right? So, and in that situation, it's going to make the car to stall out and die. And when it stall out and die, you're going to be pretty much running helter-skelter trying to solve the problem. Now, we're also going to go into other part of the ignition system, which is the spark plug. A faulty spark plug that are dead can also make the car to start and die. So, if your spark plug has stayed, or your ignition coil has stayed up to 50,000 miles on it, then it's due for replacement, be it still good or not, even if your car is working. Because if it doesn't replace it, it's going to result into your car taking more fuel than usual, stalling, rough idle, and all that, engine underperformance, you name it. So you want to also make sure that you replace the spark plug, which you have over here when they get up to 50,000 miles, because when they're 40 or bad, then you're going to make your car to start and die in seconds. And we also talk about weak car battery. Weak car battery, like here, the weak car battery can actually make the car to start and die. And what is that? Because let's say, for instance, that you have a battery alternator and your alternator is not having a sufficient power to charge this very battery right here. There are systems that they are designed specifically to maintain some certain amperage on the battery. So if the alternator fails to actually bring the right power that's supposed to keep this battery charged and keep the system running, then the battery has failed to put up the right power. We're talking about BMW and some other European cars. So if this battery is not putting out the right amperage and right power to keep this engine running, the system, the ECU is going to detect that and shut the car down. So replacing the battery is just going to be the best part. And sometimes also corrosion on the battery, like you can see right now, due to dampness, can actually result into it. Like you can see the white, that's corrosion right there. So it actually creates some sort of a loose contact between this battery and the power going inside the car, therefore creating what we call a voltage drop across the circuits, which also didn't allow the right power that has been kept inside this battery here to be sent into the system. So you want to clean these terminals very well and make sure that they're having a very good and firm contact. All right. So that is the fix for that. Now, the next guy we're going to be talking about here is lack of fuel. lack of fuel. We can talk about all this whole thing without talking about fuel. And where does the fuel get into the tank? This one here, that's where the fuel, you pop it open and you get a gasoline into it. So when there is no fuel inside the car, little or no fuel is going to be enough to actually prime and get over here, and get into this injector rail, and you start the car, but you can't keep the car running. So most manufacturers, car makers who are very good at what they do, put this nipple here so you can be able to just pinch it and see if there is a fuel that's coming towards that very place there. One, there could be fuel inside the tank, but it's not being transported down here because of this guy here, which they call the fuel pump. It can come in different sizes, different shapes, depending on the car make and model. So when you're treating about no fuel, you can actually figure that out when this gauge right here is reading near to 0. But although sometimes when the gauge becomes very, very terrible, like in most ML and most car models, you're going to be seeing it read in full tank, but you don't have any gasoline in your gas tank. So trusting the gauge most oftentimes doesn't work, and that is why this guy here has to play the role. Now let me go ahead and show you how to test it if suppose you don't have a pressure tester. Getting a simple broom like this is enough. You just break a little portion of it, right? Then you open this cap up to expose the nipple. Don't suck it. Just a little pinch. You can see some fuel, gasoline pouring out right there. So that shows that there is fuel. But now when you try to crank the car, if you have a gauge, a pressure gauge, you're going to put it here. You should be expecting the range of 35 to 45 psi. Depends on the system configuration of the very car which you put in it. Some of them can actually put how many bars you should be able to see there, right? So that if it's less, then you should know that that is where the problem is. But if there is no fuel coming here at all, then there could be no fuel in your gas tank, and that is where the problem is. Then a failing fuel pump can actually cause the same problem. A failing fuel pump can actually send fuel here, but not enough pressure to keep transporting the fuel back into this rail that's going to force the injector to open. That's going to force fuel through the injector, because the fuel doesn't get pressure just only to come all the way here. No, it also needs pressure to get through this very injector. You need pressure. That's why that pressure is very important. So when it gets weak, it doesn't maintain a very healthy pressure that's going to open that injector even when the power is going in through there. So it's going to let the car start and dies. Then the next thing which you're going to be looking at there is also an injector, a 40 injectors. Let's say that the injectors are not getting power, or maybe they get power randomly. For some set of reasons, they can open, allow the fuel to get in, and you start it and it shuts off. So you want to also make sure that you place your hand right on this very injector here, or use a screwdriver, put it there and put it at your ear and make a phone call to the injector while someone is trying to start it or crank it, and see if you can get some sort of injector pulse while they are cranking it. If you're not getting an injector pulse, then there be every potential, every probability there is no any power coming to this very injector, or the injectors are defective. And if they are defective, then they could permit power to go in sometimes and restrict them sometimes, which is going to actually cause the engine to start and dies in a second. Then the next one we're going to be talking about here is fuel injector sensor or fuel pressure sensor. Fuel pressure sensor is often mounted in newer model cars along this very fuel rail here, and that very sensor there is actually controlling the amount of fuel. All this is actually engineering meant to actually increase the fuel economy and give you a best gas mileage. So when this very fuel pressure sensor failed, I blogged about it in my YouTube, so you should check about the fuel pressure sensor symptoms and all that. It has a tendency of shutting down the car at will when you start the car and it's defective. Now the next one which I'm also going to be talking about is fuel pressure regulator. Most fuel pressure regulator also are going to be found in this very side here. What is the fix for that fuel pressure sensor? It's a replacement. You can service it. Now the fuel pressure regulator is also mounted in this very fuel rail for the system that have a return line. A system that doesn't have a return line system like this one here, you can always find them in the fuel system inside the tank. So the fuel pressure regulator for most cars that are no return line system like this very car here is it has only one line. If you see one line going into the fuel rail, which you can see the arrow marked here, then that's a no return line system. What that means is that every fuel that comes from the fuel tank, it gets the burn inside the which means the quantity has been well calculated and engineered from the fuel pump housing where the pressure regulator is situated, which I'm going to be showing the picture right in this very video here. So if that pressure regulator failed, the car is going to start and die because the car, the pressure, the threshold parameter pressure, which is supposed to be maintained between 35 to 45 psi, is not being maintained, and it's not enough to actually push this injector to open. So it's gonna be creating some sort of ping pong situation. You pump the fuel, the pressure dropped. The pressure goes up and drops, so it's gonna start the car and it dies in seconds. Now also, some of this fuel pressure regulator, even if you don't find it within the pressure rail for non-return line like this one, if it's a return line type of like this one, a return line system, fuel system, delivery system, you're going to be finding it somewhere around here, and it has a vacuum hose in it. So, and it's stainless, and most of the times I'm going to display the picture right here so you can be able to take a look at it and know how it looks like while looking for it. Then the other side also, I'm also going to show the picture of Audi models and some other Volkswagen Passat model where the pressure regulator is right on the fuel filter pump, fuel filter. So if you're looking for it, combine the whole place inside your gas tank and you can find it, then that sound of the is right on the filter. So you're gonna be needing to replace the filter. This is very much common with Volkswagen, Bentley, Audi motors. So guys, what can you do about it? It's not serviceable. Replace them. Replace them. Next guest we have in our list is the fuel pump leak. This fuel pump leak here, let me show you where it most often times are called leak often occur. You can see this fuel pump right now. I'm trying to let light into it so you can see it the way I see it. Okay, now I don't think you can see very well, but if you look into this and look into where the fuel pump actually grip the supply part that actually starts sending the fuel to this fuel rail here, there is an O-ring here that when it slots in here, it locks it. That O-ring looks sometimes green, black, depends on the color. Like you can see this O-ring on this very map sensor here, right? So if that O-ring is torn apart, it's going to create a leak, and when that leak is there, it's not going to allow this fuel to pump all the fuel pump to pump all the fuel, send all the fuel that is actually supposed to be the quantity, the right quantity that's supposed to be transported into this fuel combustion chamber. So a lot of them are going to be leaking back into the tank. I've seen this kind of problem before. It's hard to diagnose sometimes, but you need to have a pressure tester here to have it there to examine the quantity before you can be able to know that there is something going very fishy inside the fuel tank. So the fuel pump leak can actually cause it, and when it happens, it provides just little quantity. It can maintain the right quantity which this engine needs, and therefore the car is going to shut down, start with fuel, and shut down in seconds. So what you do, have to find it and fix them up, right? The next guy on our list is fuel injector sensor or fuel pressure sensor. I've talked about it before this very time, so you actually know whom the guy is and be very, very conversant with it, right? Now the next one we have is bad carburetor. A bad carburetor is mostly in most vintage or old model vehicle. Some of them stops around 96. They didn't cross to 2000, so they didn't made their soul rest in peace. But they're often situated right here. The measures, they actually pair up to correct the air fuel imbalance, because they have the injector right there, monotronic. Some are electrically wired, some doesn't have electric in it. So it ensures the right quantity of fuel is injected into the fuel and keep the engine running. And when this very carburetor gets bad or get dirty, it makes a lot of mess. You know, it throws a lot of tantrums and it throws the car out of balance, starting, shutting down, you name it, run rich, run lean, all kinds of problems. So what can you do about it when you find out this kind of a problem? You can clean it, service it, rebuild it with a kit, and if it doesn't work, you can replace them, and the problem should be gone. Next on our list is engine control module. That's the king of the king, the lord of the lord, the manager, the CEO of this guy, because this boss doesn't take no shit. It deals with everybody with different measures. It has a great personality, and it has a way of dealing with different problems, interacting with everyone simultaneously to keep everyone checked. Hey, how are you doing? I hope you're doing good. It tells the map sensor, are you doing okay? It tells the canister valve through this guy here, are you doing great? The battery power, how are you doing, guys? The coolant temperature sensor, how is life treating you? I hope you're not feeling too fried up there. You're feeling heat every time. Ignition coil, how is your day going? The alternator, I hope your kids are fine. Or the throttle position sensor, the idle air control valve, I hope you guys are smiling. So this guy is the boss of all boss. He's the CEO who talks everybody to think outside the box. He is the real deal. Now, get to understand what happens when this daddy that checks on all these kids that is around here, every check on them, make sure they're in good condition. If they're not in good condition, it gives you a feedback when he is having a problem, when he have a bad or rough day. Now, nobody checks on this guy anymore. So everybody started losing their mind and getting out of proportion. So the ECO is the father of the day. The ECO is the controller, the general, the president, the chairman, the CEO of this very organization we're talking about here. So long as the car is concerned, including your injector pulse width, whatever, altering it, closing it, the fuel pump pressure, he knows pretty much about every guy right here. But not every guy around here knows him because he's the boss of the boss, you know. He is the wolf of the Wall Street. So if this guy here have a problem, have a very slight headache, he's going to have a very big problem, right? So his role on trying to keep your engine running is highly astronomical and can't be overemphasized. In as much as they're bringing new sensors into place, all these host of sensors that are here, oxygen sensors and the rest of them, it manages, it controls, it gives parameters on how this all this whole component functions. So if it doesn't get all their parameters correct and doesn't actually regulate them, then they start having a problem, including the car starting and shutting down. So you want to pay attention to this guy, and most often times the funny side is that when you start having a problem, there are just few models that are going to check on it and say, hey, how are you doing? Like the brake, the ABS. This guy here, the ABS control module is going to say, hey guy, how are you doing? I hope you're fine. You're not looking fine. If this is automatic transmission control, automatic transmission system car, the TCM also is going to say, hey buddy, so those among the two top bodies that are going to say, boss, are you doing fine today? And if does not respond, then they know that the boss is having a problem. It could be typhoid, it could be cancer, it could be HIV, you know. So now it's all for you to figure it out. And when maybe also there is a CAN bus communication system, which this bus is also part of it. So there is no any decision that goes about in and out of this very car without the boss knowing about it. Even the body control module communicates with it. All of them communicate with it. It's very happy with everyone, but so long as you're doing your duty, else it reports you. And you can find the information right there if you plug a scan to right underneath the steering column control of this very car here. And voila. If you don't find it and every other thing is in place, most certain times he can actually be one of the culprit. And the only solution, there are a bunch of guys who repairs it online, but most of the times you can find a very good working one in the junkyard, get it programmed, and it should start working if it is the one that is really coded with security, high-tech security. But some of them, like 1996 Volkswagen Make 3 or Toyota, they don't have this kind of coding, so you can just get it in there and boom, it starts working. But for this very new model one, if you get it in without coding in, the cluster gauge, this guy mentioned, this cluster gauge here is a boss of his own because the ECU reports also to him. So they communicate all together. They are the chief, they are the real boss here. The BCM, the cluster, the TCM, and the breaker, the ABS system. So they report exclusively to each other on how they are performing. So you want to also make sure you want to check that. The next one is 40 EGR valve. This car is obviously not equipped with EGR valve, which stands for exhaust gas recirculation system. So if EGR valve in most Hyundai, Toyota, Peugeot is bad, which actually helps to makes your car runs better efficiently. If it doesn't recirculate the gas that actually collects from your exhaust system and get it back into the system to make it run much more cleaner and much more efficient, then it has a tendency actually to shut your car off. Now, how do you actually going to be able to see this? Sometimes you can be able to see the error code is not so hidden, and if you find the error code related to it, most of the times 50% chance that it's dirty and it needs some cure, because as this recirculation of smoke and some of that oil debris gets in there, it gets clogged sometimes. So you need to flush it out. Flush it very clean. Watch tutorial on how to be able to do this. It's very simple. Lose out the 4 bolts or sometimes 3 bolts that hold it in place like Hyundai, and boom, you get it flushed out, clean all the carbon deposit, then allow it to dry, then fit it back in, start the car, rev it up to 1500 RPMs and leave it for a while, rev it again and see. If it doesn't keep up and still shuts down and still throw the trouble code of the P error code bad EGR valve, then you're gonna get it replaced. And when you get it replaced, then it doesn't need any programming. It's going to start working right away. Then the next thing you want to look at also is a clogged fuel filter. The importance and the vital role which the fuel filter actually play in a car is highly astronomical and can't be ruled out of the equation. As the fuel travels from the fuel tank, when you have drive up to 30,000 miles or even 50,000 miles, the fuel travel through here when it's being pumped by this guy here named fuel pump. This beautiful guy here is by fuel pump. Traveled all the way here. When it traveled down to this very portion here, it passed through a lot of filters. There are some filters that goes through here and some goes here, which is through the inline filter. That any of them can actually cause the mess, because when it's totally blocked, totally clogged, it restricts, create a high restriction and make this guy to work more trying to draw fuel and pump it. So we are talking about two restrictions here. One on the fuel filter, let's say three. One here, one here, which is the inline, then the one that are on the injectors. But those two, most often times, when in a very healthy condition, they don't even allow dirt debris to come over here. So it takes a lot of mileage, maybe like 150 or 200 for this one to really get clogged up. Oh, no. It takes up to 100. So, and that is why the servicing of your injectors is very, very vital for your engine performance. But the main one which we're talking about is actually the inline fuel filter and the one that is in-tank fuel filter. So if those ones are highly restricted, then they have every tendency of starving the engine the right fuel quantity that you need. And when you start it, it's going to start the car, but it's not enough to keep the engine running, so you shut it down. So what can you do about it? You can flush it. You can flush it with a carburetor cleaner, but typically the cost of getting a carburetor cleaner most often times and the fuel filter can be literally the same, except for the one that have a fuel regulator inside. My best advice, candid advice, is to replace it and breathe a breath of fresh air. The final thought, which I'm going to use as bonus, although it doesn't most often times create those kind of scenario, is a faulty coolant temperature sensor. This guy here has a tendency of not even allowing the car to start, which just few mechanics are very aware of it. And that is it right here. Most often times they come in two places, one here, and the other one could be traced down to the this pipe here, which is the coolant section. If you look down here pretty much well, let me see if I can give you a signal. If you can see my hand there, look at my hand here. You can see my hand there, right? That's where the other coolant sensor ECT is. So if you have a problem, it has a whole lot of problem to make the ECU to shut down the engine because of dumping too much fuel into the combustion chamber. That is not very healthy for the engine performance. So, and also have the tendency of shutting the engine down, making the car to stall out and die, hard start and all that. I hope you enjoyed this very tutorial, which I said is going to be really comprehensive to get your pen and paper. And I don't need to tell you to smash the subscribe button right there and give me a thumbs up for a job well done to give you this very precise information, which I don't want to break it up just on one video, one kill, one shot. I hope to catch you guys later. This is Dr. Cool Auto Fix. Don't forget, see you soon on the next video. Bye for now.